In the mid-19th century, the promise of a better life in the American West beckoned thousands of pioneers to brave the perilous journey across the country. The California Trail was a long, grueling route that led travelers from Missouri through the Great Plains, the Rocky Mountains, and into the fertile valleys of California. For many, it represented hope, a chance to start anew, to escape poverty, and to build a future in the unknown frontier. But for one group of pioneers, the dream of a new life would soon turn into a nightmare of unimaginable suffering and survival. In the spring of 1846, the Donner Party, a group of 87 settlers led by George Donner and James Reed, set out from Springfield, Illinois, with high hopes for their journey. Their group was a mix of families, young children, and elderly members, all bound for California. They had heard about the fertile land and opportunities waiting for them, but they had also been warned of the dangers of the journey, harsh weather, rugged terrain, and the risks of crossing the Sierra Nevada mountains, a formidable natural barrier. The Donner Party's journey began with optimism, but they quickly ran into difficulties. The group had hired a guide, Lansford W. Hastings, who had promised to show them a shortcut, a faster route through the mountains that would save them time and help them reach California before winter set in. Hastings' advice, however, would prove to be disastrous. The shortcut he recommended, known as the Hastings Cutoff, was not only more difficult than advertised, but it was also poorly mapped and incredibly treacherous. The group was forced to navigate through uncharted deserts, treacherous mountain passes, and dense forests, all while dealing with the scorching summer heat and the scarcity of food and water. By the time they reached the Sierra Nevada mountains in late October, the Donner Party had already fallen behind schedule. The shortcut had cost them precious time, and now, with winter fast approaching, they found themselves deep in the mountains, caught between the threat of snow and freezing temperatures. The group's situation became increasingly dire. The weather was turning, and snow began to fall in heavy sheets, blanketing the mountainside. At the same time, their supplies were running low, and many of the wagons had broken down due to the rough terrain. Faced with mounting difficulties, the group reached a difficult decision. They had to move forward and try to get over the mountain pass before the snow trapped them for the winter, or they risked being stuck in the mountains with little food and shelter. The snow came faster and harder, and the pass they had hoped to cross was soon buried under a thick, impassable blanket. Now, stranded in the frozen wilderness, the Donner Party faced a battle against the elements, hunger, and the relentless cold. The once hopeful settlers now found themselves fighting for survival in an unforgiving landscape, with no clear plan and no guarantee of rescue. The extreme isolation of the Sierra Nevada mountains meant that help was hundreds of miles away, and the nearest settlement was unreachable. Trapped by nature's cruelty and their own mistakes, the Donner Party's fight for survival had only just begun. As the Donner Party found themselves trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains during the winter of 1846, the initial hope for a quick resolution gave way to an overwhelming fight for survival. The snowstorms that had forced them to stop in their tracks intensified, and the temperatures plummeted to deadly levels. The pioneers, who had been so full of hope when they left Illinois, now faced the brutal reality of starvation, exposure, and the slow march of time, with no clear end in sight. By early November, the group was stuck in a desolate valley, cut off from the rest of the world. The California Trail had been a route of opportunity, but now it had become a death trap. The snows were deep, and the mountains were impassable. The travelers were unable to continue forward, and their wagons, once vital for carrying supplies, were now useless. The group's remaining food was rapidly dwindling, and what they had left was quickly becoming spoiled or inedible. Captain George Donner and his family were among the first to be immobilized by the snow. At the same time, other families within the group began to suffer from the cold, sickness, and malnutrition. The group was living in temporary shelters made of the limited resources available to them: tents, tree branches, and whatever they could gather. But these meager shelters were insufficient against the relentless snow and cold. With no way to hunt or forage effectively and with little food left, the situation grew increasingly dire. By December, a critical decision was made: some members of the party would attempt to make it to a nearby settlement for help. A small group of 15 individuals, including men, women, and children, set out in an attempt to reach civilization. The journey through the snow and freezing temperatures was treacherous, and the hope of finding help was slim. These brave souls, known as the Forlorn Hope, faced the most extreme conditions: freezing nights, limited rations, and a difficult terrain that seemed to conspire against them at every turn. They pressed on, driven by the hope that they could save the others still stranded in the mountains. The Forlorn Hope struggled forward, but their supplies ran out quickly. Without food, they were forced to scavenge whatever they could from the land. The journey became a nightmare, with many members of the group collapsing from exhaustion and hunger. Eventually, with their strength failing and their morale shattered, the Forlorn Hope resorted to a desperate and horrifying choice: cannibalism. It was a decision born out of the most primal instincts for survival. Those who died during the journey were consumed by the others, a grim act of survival that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their lives. Meanwhile, back at the camp in the mountains, the situation continued to deteriorate. The remaining members of the Donner Party, weak, malnourished, and desperate, waited for rescue that seemed increasingly unlikely. They had sent out several rescue parties, but as the days turned into weeks and then months, the snowstorms persisted, and the rescuers found it nearly impossible to reach the stranded pioneers. As the survivors' physical conditions worsened, their hope began to erode. Many began to succumb to the brutal elements, while others faced the psychological toll of the prolonged ordeal. Some of the group members had died from malnutrition, exposure, and illness, and the survivors had to contend with the reality that they might not make it out alive. In early February 1847, a second rescue party arrived in the mountains. Their arrival brought a glimmer of hope, but it also served as a reminder of the heavy cost of survival. Only 48 of the 87 original members of the Donner Party remained alive. The survivors were weak, traumatized, and physically broken. The arrival of the rescuers did not mark the end of their suffering, as they still faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives and recovering from the horrors of the journey. The Donner Party's story became a tragic lesson in the limits of human endurance, the dangers of blind optimism, and the harsh reality of survival in the wilderness. Their story of survival and the extreme measures they had to take in order to stay alive would be remembered as one of the darkest episodes in American history. It became a cautionary tale about the risks of the westward expansion and the importance of preparation, knowledge, and realistic expectations when venturing into the unknown. But amid the tragedy, there were also stories of immense courage. The Forlorn Hope's struggle for survival, the heroic efforts of the rescuers, and the indomitable will of the surviving members of the Donner Party all served as testament to the human spirit's ability to endure even the most extreme circumstances. The survivors of the Donner Party, forever marked by their experiences, carried the weight of their ordeal with them throughout their lives. Many went on to live full lives, but the horrors of their time in the Sierra Nevada mountains would never leave them. The Donner Party's tragic tale of survival in the Sierra Nevada mountains became a defining chapter in American pioneer history. While the death toll of 41 individuals is a stark reminder of the harsh realities of westward expansion, the survivors' grit and resilience have left a legacy that endures in both the lessons learned and the haunting consequences of their choices. Though the survivors return to society after their ordeal, the emotional and psychological scars they carried would last a lifetime. In the aftermath, the tragedy prompted vital changes in how future pioneers would prepare for the hardships of the trail, reshaping the notion of what it meant to embark on a journey into the unknown. The survivors of the Donner Party were forever marked by the trauma they had endured. The psychological toll of losing family members, enduring starvation, and resorting to cannibalism to stay alive haunted them in the years that followed. Many of them struggled with survivor's guilt, wondering why they had lived while others perished. Others grappled with the moral and emotional weight of the decisions they had made in order to survive. For years, the members of the Donner Party found it difficult to talk about their experiences. They carried the burden of their memories, and the story of their survival became one they could only revisit reluctantly. Yet, despite the lingering trauma, the survivors eventually rebuilt their lives. Some went on to have families and settle in California, the very place they had hoped to reach when they started their journey. Others faced the challenge of reintegration into society, where their story became both a cautionary tale and a source of fascination for those who had never endured such hardship. The memory of the Donner Party became a subject of legend and, in many ways, a lesson about the limits of human endurance and the fragility of life in the face of overwhelming forces. The legacy of the Donner Party also had a profound impact on the westward expansion. While the group's ill-fated journey was far from the first tragedy of the trail, it was one of the most widely known and documented, serving as a grim reminder of the dangers that lay ahead for those who ventured into the wilderness. The story of the Donner Party prompted important shifts in the way future emigrants prepared for the journey. Many of the lessons learned from their ordeal centered on the importance of preparation, the need to respect the challenges of the land, and the dangers of relying too heavily on shortcuts. The most significant lesson from the Donner Party's experience was the critical importance of timing. The group's decision to take the Hastings Cutoff, a shortcut that promised to shorten their journey, proved disastrous. The shortcut delayed their progress significantly and ultimately cost them precious time, leaving them vulnerable to the early onset of snowstorms in the Sierra Nevada. Had they followed the more established route, they likely would have avoided the catastrophic winter conditions that trapped them in the mountains. The tragedy highlighted the dangers of underestimating the severity of the land and the importance of sticking to reliable routes, especially in the unpredictable, unforgiving terrain of the western frontier. The party's reliance on Lansford Hastings' shortcut also raised questions about the reliability of guides and the dangers of misinformation. Hastings had promoted his route as a faster way to reach California, but he had little experience with the actual conditions of the trail. His inaccurate recommendations led to the group's delays and increased hardships. After the tragedy, emigrants began to put more trust in well-established routes and relied less on untested shortcuts, understanding that the unknown could often be a deadly gamble. The Donner Party's story also underscored the importance of proper supplies and preparation. As the group ran out of food, they were forced to rely on limited rations and eventually turned to more desperate measures. Had they brought more provisions, had they been better prepared for the potential of delays in the mountains, they may have been able to withstand the extreme conditions of the Sierra Nevada. The tragedy highlighted the fact that even experienced pioneers could be caught unprepared by the forces of nature, and the harsh reality that survival in the wild required meticulous planning and a readiness for the worst. Another significant lesson from the Donner Party disaster was the value of timely decision-making. In many cases, the group's struggles were exacerbated by poor choices made along the way. Had the party turned back sooner when they realized they were behind schedule or when they encountered unexpected obstacles, they may have been able to avoid the perilous conditions of the Sierra Nevada in winter. Once they were trapped by the snow, their situation became increasingly dire as each moment passed without a solution. The delayed decision to send out the Forlorn Hope rescue party, despite the worsening weather, was another critical misstep. The tragic delay in calling for help only made the situation more desperate, and it took a tremendous toll on the group. The story of the Donner Party became a powerful cautionary tale, and its legacy endured for generations. It was a reminder of both the potential perils and the heroic acts of survival that could occur in the face of overwhelming adversity. Over time, the tragedy became ingrained in American cultural memory. It was the subject of books, films, documentaries, and folklore, all seeking to understand how such an awful fate could have befallen a group of hopeful pioneers. In popular culture, the Donner Party's ordeal has been examined through the lens of survival, ethics, and human will. But it also became a touchstone for discussions of human resilience and the instinct to survive. Despite the extreme circumstances, the survivors of the Donner Party managed to persevere, and their story became one of remarkable endurance. The survivors demonstrated incredible bravery and selflessness in helping one another, even in the direst of circumstances. The decision to take the extreme step of cannibalism to stay alive was never easy, but it was a choice driven by a deep instinct for survival, a decision that carried with it both moral and physical consequences. The Donner Party tragedy continues to serve as a reminder of the fragility of life, the limits of human endurance, and the stark realities of the American frontier. It showed the power of nature to shape human fate and the strength of human determination in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Their story lives on, not just as a cautionary tale of the perils of the westward expansion, but as a testament to the unyielding will to survive when faced with the most extreme odds. The lessons learned from the Donner Party's tragedy still resonate today. Their story serves as a powerful reminder to never underestimate the power of preparation, the harshness of the environment, and the strength of the human will. In our own lives, we may not face the same kind of peril as the Donner Party, but we are all faced with challenges that test our limits. Let their courage, their mistakes, and their resilience inspire us to always be prepared, to make thoughtful decisions, and to never give up when facing adversity. The Donner Party's legacy is one of survival, but also of the deep responsibility we have to ourselves and others when we face the unknown.